afternoon. I hope you're all well. I'm joined today by the lovely Danny, and we're going to be talking all things occupational health. So I've known Danny for a while. We've connected, I think, on LinkedIn initially. Was it Danny?
I think it was, yeah. I think it was LinkedIn.
And we've spent a lot of time together, done a lot of joint ventures together. And he's very passionate about occupational health. He's doing some really, really interesting things. And I wanted to bring him on here to come and talk to us a bit more about the role of a scope for occupational health. But first of all, Danny, can you just tell people just a little bit about who you are, where you've been, what you're doing?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Danny Clarke. I'm the founder of Simply People. I live in Cheshire. I've been involved in the occupational health sector for probably about 15 years, despite my youthful looks, of course. But I'm not an occupational health practitioner by trade, so a lot of people think I'm a clinician. And I actually come from a HR and health and safety background, and kind of evolved and moved into occupational health over the years. And it's one of the things that kind of drew me into occupational health was just the whole way that it kind of focuses everybody together to kind of look at the workforce. And there's so many crossovers with occupational health, with HR, with health and safety, and actually looking at it holistically kind of helps with a lot of the other topics around employee engagement, culture, and obviously well-being as well. So what we've tried to do with Simply People is to try and bring that together into a community where we help people to understand what occupational health and well-being is, I guess, as simply as we can. That's probably what we're about, to be fair.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about this. I mean, occupational health has changed quite a lot, hasn't it, over the years? And we were just chatting just before we came on live. I mean, even like the last 10, 15 years and even last 5 years, like the perception of occupational health has changed. I think I'm going to say the olden days, but, put sort of 15 years ago, people thought they were being sent to occupational health as almost a punishment. And, oh, right, that's it. You've been off sick again. You're off to occupational health. And definitely in my time in occupational health as a physio, the perception seems to have changed from the managers, from HR and from the employees, really importantly. So it's just to get your thoughts really around that and what do you see, because you work with a lot of different occupational health practitioners from the MDT, don't you? So what's your own kind of view around the scope and the role of occupational health? Like when should people be using it? What is it there for?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, to be fair. I think when I first entered the sector many moons ago, it was very traditional. And I say that with all professional respect to my colleagues in occupational health, but it was predominantly people think of doctors and nurses and you're sent to doctor or nurse if something's wrong. And that's quite a hard thing to do for people that maybe don't necessarily want to admit there's something wrong. And it was always quite reactive in its approach. And what I've seen, especially over the last few years in particular, is this emergence of associated professions that have become more involved in occupational health. So like you say, physiotherapists have started to specialise more in occupational health over the last few years. It may have been longer than that, but this is just what I've noticed. And they'll bring a slightly different perspective, especially around ergonomics and musculoskeletal health. But then you've also then started to get more psychologists, psychotherapists specialising within occupational health. And it started to move, which is quite great, from a traditional approach, something's wrong, let's go and fix that person, to this holistic preventative health, which is where I think we are now. And we're starting to see the benefits of that with, especially around the mental health campaigns. So mental health was a taboo subject for many years, especially in certain sectors and certain industries. And it's quite promising that I'd probably say the last couple of years in particular, you started to be more open and people are actually coming to the fore more with mental health challenges. And I'd actually give credit to occupational health for that, because they're starting to break down those stigmas and making it acceptable for people to kind of raise mental health challenges and conditions, and the hidden conditions that maybe people in yesteryear, traditional times, wouldn't have felt comfortable to raise. And I think creating that environment and supporting the people has been a really positive change with occupational health. And I think I've also started to notice that more businesses actually are starting to notice the benefits of a healthy workforce. And you often see lots of statistics around happy employees are more productive and healthy employees are more productive. But actually business is starting to pick that up and actually run with it now. So we're seeing a lot more programs and initiatives around health within the workplace, I guess.
I think it's key with these things, isn't it, to have kind of good outcome measures and good hard data to support the return of investment, because that's a lot of the time putting the business cases in for kind of well-being, occupational health, particularly in the preventative strategies and methods. Businesses need to know that it's going to be cost effective, and it's going to, they essentially want to reduce sickness absence, don't they? Have a more productive workforce to essentially save money. Yes, there's the fluffy, we want people to feel supported, we want people to be happier, but as a business, organisations, they want to know that their money is being well spent, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other side of that is it depends on the profession that you generally engage with. So from HR perspective, it's very much has traditionally been present, absent management, and kind of encouraging employees and occasionally doing some pieces of work around well-being. Whereas if you've engaged with the health and safety profession, they've generally had a focus on compliance with the law. We need to do hearing tests, we need to do vibration tests, we need to do this. And it's only, again, more recently that health and safety managers have actually kind of begun to understand the health aspect of their role. It's not just compliance with the law, it's actually what can we do to make sure that our workplace actually helps people leave the workplace, if not healthier, then at least very much in the same state of health as when they started. And I think that's a positive thing. So one of the things I've also noticed, so just to go back to the last question, was you've seen this change in role as well. So occupational health traditionally would sit in a certain area of the business, reporting into HR, for example, or reporting into health and safety. And actually, you've started to see more stakeholders within businesses want to get involved within occupational health and provide their support for the activities that health practitioners and the health community are doing.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. And what do you see in terms of different sizes of business? Because some companies will have in-house occupational health, in-house health and safety, for example. Quite commonly, they will have an HR before they have occupational health, and then there might be sort of one designated health and safety person. So what do you see in sort of the size of the businesses, sort of small to medium enterprises, and as they grow? Is there any sort of advice around that? So a lot of companies don't have access to occupational health, or they might have just an ad hoc referral, but as they get bigger, like when do they know how and when to get more support with their occupational health? What kind of things would they be looking at?
Quite, that's a really good question. I think it depends, if I'm honest. I think it depends on the sector and the nature of the industry that the company works within, is to see what degree of exposure they've had to occupational health. But from my perspective, if you're starting to look at HR support, if you're starting to look at health and safety support, then it's a natural tie-in for those two roles to then look at, well, how am I promoting healthy workforces? How am I looking after my staff? So I've worked with, through different companies even, companies that have employed a couple of people right the way through to large corporate multinationals and supported the in-house teams as well as run the occupational health services for them. And what's been the common denominator has generally been the management and actually this desire to help people come back to work. And it's interesting, actually, that's one of the other things I've noticed, is that very few companies that I've engaged with are looking at occupational health as a tool to remove somebody from a business. It's predominantly been, and I'd say the vast majority of cases, it's very much been, how can we support this person to stay at work and actually to fulfill their duties, or find reasonable adjustments that's going to help them to kind of continue within the workplace, which has been a really positive. I've not answered the question. I know, I'm conscious of that. So my first tip would be, and what I say to everybody, regardless of the size of the company, look at your statistics, look at the data that you capture within your business. That should then help shape what you need as a company. So, for example, if you start measuring absence statistics, you can start to identify trends within departments, within areas that you can then say, actually, we do need some support with this. If you look at demographics of who you employ and what jobs they do, you can start to look at the simple stuff, things like, do we have people moving objects? Let's consider not just manual handling, but let's look at a musculoskeletal program overall. And that's generally where, if I'm brutally honest, where I'd normally suggest physiotherapists, for example, around manual handling tasks, because you can have a manual handling trainer come in and teach somebody to move a box. But most workplaces nowadays don't move boxes unless you work for Amazon or DPD or something like that. So actually, it's kind of developing the programs that make most sense proactively before the people start to get musculoskeletal conditions, for example. So look, my first tip would be, look at the data that you've got and then see what trends that gives you. But understand what it is that you're looking for as well is another question. So one of the things that we do on the platform, let me plug my platform here, is we have a concierge. funny enough. And we've had a few clients use it whereby they're not quite sure what they need or the type of practitioner they need. So what I tend to do then is one of the team would then speak to them to say, what's your company? What is it that's the issue? Let's not break data protection, but let's have an understanding of what it is that you need. And then we can then advise them on the best type of search or the best type of practitioner, making their recommendations, but the best type of practitioners to engage with, and actually what's going to give them the best return for their investment. Because that's, again, it's quite important for people, because what we want to make sure is that it's this right provider first time approach. It's not the traditional, let somebody to a nurse or a doctor who then sends them on to a physio, who then sends them on for counselling. Let's go straight to somebody who can specialise with those conditions. And then we've got the nurse if we need to for other support afterwards. But yeah, that's kind of what we try to do. If you're not sure, reach out and have a chat and we'll help you. There's my best tip.
Best tips. And you mentioned there about like the managers a little couple of sentences ago, and that's really important as well, isn't it? It's the organisation and the culture, but it's also that the managers know how to utilise occupational health. So when to refer somebody, and when, you know, managers hopefully are trained to be equipped to manage some aspects of, you know, returning someone to work, return to work interviewing, things like that. But it's knowing, you know, when things are more complex and when someone, you know, maybe is having extended absence or repetitive absence, or, you know, something's highlighted that needs, you know, a bit more of an impartial and confidential discussion to help support that employer. So I think that was a key point you said. And you also said about the data. So I'm amazed how some organisations still don't monitor their sickness absence data. So people come to me and say, hey, Claire, we need physiotherapy for our staff. And I'll say, okay, what's your MSK sickness absence rate? And they're like, oh, I'm not sure. Let me try and find out. And then they're like, oh, we don't. Some of them don't even record any data, which I find fascinating. But apart from that, sometimes they record the sickness absence, but they're not recording what the reason is. And I think that's really, really key. And so, you know, if you said, oh, my sickness absence is a certain rate, but you don't know what is causing a mental health thing. Is it generalized anxiety and depression? Is it musculoskeletal? Is it stress at work? Is it, you know, is it something else completely? Until you sort of have a look at that, it's really hard to get your footing as to understanding what it is you're going to need. And if you're then going to put any services in place to say, I'm just talking about physio because I'm a physio, but say you then put physiotherapy for staff in, it's then going to be harder for us to, you know, look at the changes that we can make and the return of investment if we're not clear what is the MSK, that, you know, the truest that we can extract MSK sickness absence. Otherwise it gets really tricky if it's all muddled in together. You're going to have less of an impact there. Really
definitely. And it's interesting you say, just to come back on a couple of those points. So culture plays a massive part, and I've spoken to quite a few people recently who've said about the role that line managers play in particular. And it's interesting how many people will have a program, or companies will write verse and chapter in a policy and say, this is what we do for our employees, but they miss the opportunity of the communication aspect of it. And what I mean by that is, quite often if people have a challenge or are struggling with something, how many people would actually go to their line manager to say, do you know what, I'm struggling here? And those that do, the percentage that will then have a line manager that supports them correctly is very small, actually, because quite a few people that I've spoken to say, well, I told my line manager that I was struggling, and they told me that they're going to refer me to Occupational Health. And that was it. It just went, they just cut cold. So they say, it's not my responsibility, I'm going to hand you on to somebody else. I was actually having a conversation with somebody to say, how can we help? What can we do? Not going into a diagnosis or an assessment, but actually just being there and listening to them. I think sometimes managers can have a habit of listening but not hearing what somebody's saying. And I think actually having the empathy to actually understand what somebody's saying to them and the impact that they can then make on that person positively is quite a big step from a cultural perspective. And it's like at the moment with video calls. So I again speak to lots of people on video calls, and they'll have team meetings where they've teams of 20 people to go, check in, how is everybody? Everybody okay? In a group setting of 20 people, how many people would feel comfortable to go, I'm really struggling? Actually, very few, because they're putting their head above the parapet in front of a room of 20 people. So actually breaking those down into smaller groups can sometimes help as well. And the other thing, just to kind of come back to about what you said about just on the statistics part, Claire, when we used to run the programs for companies with wellbeing, and we'd go in, and this is the other challenge that people have around the awareness side. So sometimes we'd go in to do a pitch for a presentation or a tender or something like that, and people say, we want a wellbeing program. You go, great, why? And they go, well, because my friend's running one in their company and we want people to come and take their blood pressures of our staff. You go, great, why? What's the underlying cause? What's your absence statistics? Oh, well, we've got quite a high proportion of people off with mental health issues. You go, so why are you doing blood pressure checks? Let's look at the root cause of your data, and actually let's look at it so that we can actually make a difference. And like you say about return on investment, if you understand why you're trying to do something, then you can make sure that your initiatives are actually going to work and address that. Because the other thing that sometimes happens is people have this collective approach where they say, well, everyone wants to know how to eat healthy. Brilliant. Of course they do. But actually 80% of your workforce already know how to eat healthy. So how are you going to engage with those guys and girls? So actually, why don't you try and maybe consider making something a bit more individual? So actually you can engage with as large percentage of the workforce as possible and include those peripatetic workers as well as those that work in the head office. Sorry, that's me getting on a rant. I don't mean to, but it's one of my frustrations that you just go, think about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah. And I guess since COVID has hit, everything, a lot of things have gone virtual now, haven't they? Not just physios done not virtual work, but also occupational health nurses and doctors. A lot of things have become more virtual. A lot of wellbeing programs, back care classes, like you name it. A lot of it's sort of interactive and online classes. So there is really a scope to reach far and wide now with occupational health, and it has sort of enabled organisations to pick and choose where they get support in some respects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just what we've had with the current situation is that it is a lot more accessibility because people have had to change. So that support, like you say, is more widely available. So people have switched on to telephones, video support and things like that, and webinars and video calls, and really supported their employees from that perspective. But I think sometimes what we're heading towards is another challenge, which is all those employees that were put on furlough that are now suddenly starting to ramp up to go back to work. They've not been in the workplace for over a year potentially, and actually a lot of employers were so fearful of actually contacting them for fear of, well, the government might think we're getting them to work, so we've just not contacted them. That reintegration is something that people really need to start thinking about. Because
I have heard from a few occupational health nurses and doctors that there's a bit of a view that in some cases people who would probably be off sick are actually on furlough scheme at the moment. So as you say, when these people come back to work, there's all the inactivity and everything else for people that were able to work, but also the people that were maybe struggling, there's presenteeism, they're having repetitive absence, now they've been away from work. And we know that working is good for health, and that the longer they're off, the harder it is to get them back in. There's going to be a whole raft of referrals to occupational health, fitness to work, and man refs, because it's just going to be inundated. I think once the scheme potentially ends. I don't know if you have any views on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think people are going to start asking people to return to work, and there's going to be this whole psychological dilemma where people are saying, but I've been off work for a period of time and I'm uncomfortable coming back to work, which is, again, we know that people that have been off sick for more than six weeks or so, there's a percentage of 1 in 5, I think it is, that are unlikely to return or that will struggle to return. But it's also those people that are quite nervous and anxious about COVID in itself and leaving the house and being back in a group environment. And it's all well and good for companies to say, but you now need to come back to work, that's it. But actually overcoming those challenges without foresight is going to be quite difficult. And I wouldn't like to be the managers that kind of wants to impose this blanket rule that you have to come back into the office. I think what we potentially will see, or we should see within companies, is this approach to focus more on the outputs, which a lot of organizations seem to have kind of adopted, where people have been able to juggle their family commitments and the caring responsibilities as well as their work. And actually, I'd like to think that more organisations will continue with that moving forwards. And like I say, those that maybe needed the support that would have been absent otherwise, that actually will start to understand that they don't necessarily need to be in 9 to 5, Monday to Friday for that specific job. They can take responsibility for caring. Because again, there's statistics around actually when people say they're sick, they're not actually sick. They're looking after their loved one, they're looking at have caring responsibilities. So hopefully that this situation will actually make those conversations easier for people to have. And so we might not necessarily see the man refs if the managers that we referenced earlier have the empathetic understanding of how they can support those employees coming back. If they do need referrals though, obviously you can search on the platform and find doctors, nurses, physios, counsellors, and someone that can support them with the management referrals.
Yeah. So tell people more about Simply People, because you're super passionate about occupational health, which is why we, I think, connected and why we talk all the time, and we rant about things.
Good word.
Just talk a bit about what is it that you're doing and what's your vision for things. So you've got some great ideas.
So Simply People is the community for occupational health and wellbeing, designed to assist providers to showcase their expertise. A lot of providers, from my experience, and I mean, no disrespect, are very backgrounds for clinicians, doctors, nurses, physios, etc. NHS, brilliant organisations, but they haven't necessarily got the full grasp of business-related skills, marketing, and things like that. And what we're trying to do is kind of help them understand the business side, marketing, sales, tax, insurances, finance, and all the softer skills, as I call it, leadership, recruitment, best way to look at recruitment and things like that. But also around the core health related topics. So we try to help them understand what it is that they don't necessarily know. And I know we talk quite a lot about people don't know what they don't know. So the idea was very much around certain topics to kind of just brush up their knowledge around, not just, for example, let me give you an example. So we did a webinar on vibration. So it wasn't just designed to help them understand about the tier 1 to 5 system that operates. It's also to enable them to understand why business should be doing a management of vibration, and why we talk about trigger times, why we talk about tool usage and industry, so that when they're talking to the employee, they have a bit of understanding of where they're coming from with regards to how long they use tools and what tools they're used for and stuff like that. So it's kind of giving that holistic approach to a certain health topic. I know that we did a webinar with yourself as well on home working and musculoskeletal health, which again is another issue that people have had. So we tried to pick up certain topics just to raise awareness, because a lot of people struggled with these the current lockdowns, and so we decided just to run 3 events, and we started off with webinars. And then from the webinars, we started looking at all the mastermind, the leadership groups, and started to run leadership sessions for people to kind of say, what's your issue? Let's have a supportive coaching environment that's a safe place for you to talk about your issues. And then we've run a few of those groups over the last 3 months, and we run those for 3 months. And it's designed very much to support business owners running a team, running a business, or just people who've got a challenge that we can kind of help and support them with. And then we have networking events where I started speaking to quite a few people who work on their own, one-man bands, one-woman bands, etc. And they said, I'm just lonely, ultimately. Yeah. So we just said, well, let's come together. We'll have a lunchtime hangout. There's no pressure. There's no BNI type sales. Nothing wrong with BNI. There's no hard sales approach. Just drop in and have a chat with somebody. And so we run sessions where people can speak to 6 new people for 5 minutes. And then my big passion is the outdoors. And so once lockdown stops, we're going to get people connecting outdoors and going for hikes in Snowdonia and the Peak District and the Malverns, and we're doing a partnership with Black Dog Outdoors, and it's just designed to get people networking but walking at the same time, because the benefits of being outdoors are powerful. And ultimately the community is designed just to come together, and if people have an interest or a passion for occupational health and wellbeing, this is the place. So we've got a community, we've got the new app launching in March, which will help people connect with each other, send messages and access groups on specific specialist topics. But also, if people have a specific request for a provider, they can go on and they can look and search by doctor, nurse, technician, counsellor, physiotherapist, and find a provider. They can search by service type. So if they know they need a management referral, they can then see a list of providers, or they can concierge and triage and say, I don't know what I need. And they'll speak to one of the team that then gives them a call to then help them understand what it is that they're likely to need. When they search for a provider, they get a list of providers with feedback rating, reports, etc. And then they can select the providers they want to engage with and submit a request. And then the providers go back to them. All for free.
Oh, I know, I can't believe it's all for free. It's amazing. The amount of times I'm on forums, I'm like, does anyone know of this type of person? I need it for a referral. And then you're like, Danny's like, have you checked the platform tab? I'm like, no, I need to go to the platform. So it's really great. So you can, organization, if you're in HR, you need some support with something in the workplace in the space, then head to the directory and you can search for things. And as you say, you've got the concierge as well to help them if they're not sure. As you say, if you're not quite sure, you don't want to waste your money and time with a referral. That's there is some overlap between some of the professionals, but you want the right person for that referral. Exactly, brilliant. Thank you, Danny. We've had a few comments. I'm just going to work out if I can scroll this up. 2 seconds.
Just while you do that, the other thing that we're really passionate about is specific topics that are generally taboo. So one of the things that we're building into the next release of the app is specific health topics So one of the things I've spoken to quite a lot of people about is neurodiversity. And actually what we found was a lot of people, when they enter the workplace, having been supported all throughout education with additional support and things like that, get to the workplace and suddenly it's this alien environment whereby they're kind of dropped in it. And people don't necessarily feel comfortable on their first day working to turn around to their line manager again, going back to the culture, go, I really struggle with this. By the way, I have dyspraxia, I have dyslexia, I have ADHD, and I'm not able to work in this particular way. But actually a lot of people then go, well, you tell me if there's a problem. There isn't a problem, therefore I'm just going to treat you like everybody else. And actually what we're trying to make people aware of is the range of neurodiverse conditions, and the likelihood is that somebody within their team is likely to have a condition, but also how best to support them. So that's just one of the topics that we're working on. Women's health is another one, because again, there's certain topics within women's health that people don't feel comfortable or not even knowledgeable about, that they can then support people with. So we're trying to have specific topics that actually people need to know about, because what is normal ultimately, because people are likely to have some form of condition, it may well be hidden, but as a line manager, as the leader of a team, you should be empathetic or aware enough to be able to support as wide a range of people, your team, as possible, or find access to the information where you can learn to support them better.
Exactly. And we do a lot of ergonomic DSE stuff, and we often pick up things there. So like with the dyspraxia and dyslexia, often that will come up in our assessment, and you're like, how impacted on your work, and maybe they haven't had any kind of assessment or input really since they were a teenager. Now they're obviously like in the working life, 35, and they often haven't even mentioned it to their manager, but there are some performance issues, but they can't work in the way they're being asked to work. And to one place, it springs to mind, we saw 50 DSE assessments all together on one day, and there was a really high number of dyslexia within the workplace. The type of workplace it was, naturally probably, I could see why it was, maybe they were drawn to that area of working, but the manager was not aware, the service manager was not aware that there was, so I think she knew about one of them, but there was like 15, and it was really, really hard. And like we looked at the themes, we said actually, I think the first thing to do is probably do some management training and with the managers to talk them through so they understand a bit more about it, and then strategies, things that might be useful. So we got one of the OT girls in our team to go and do that, and that was really well received. So I think it's really important. All these topics are super important and diverse as well. That's what it's all, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. But a key there though was the fact that you noticed the themes, because you kind of captured the data.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really on everybody, so we were like, hang on a minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a really high number. Really interesting. Right, I'm going to go to the comments. So we've got a hi, we've got a great from Teresa. Thank you. Loving the thumbs up. So true from Elizabeth. I'm not sure which bit you're talking about, Elizabeth, but hopefully all of it is so true. Lovely Joy has written here, great points about the failure of organisations to own the issue of health at work and helping people to recover in work. Managers are the key to providing reasonable adjustments and supporting their employees rather than washing their hands and throwing the case over the fence. So HR and Occ Health, who are ill placed to help the individual. It dies little more than a delay a productive solution, and may actually interfere with it. Yeah, because you were saying, Danny, earlier that the manager might not do anything really and then just send it off to Occupational Health or refer to Occupational Health. I've even seen it. I don't want to completely poo-poo the managers, because there are loads of great managers out there that have been trained. I don't want to say all managers don't know how to handle ill health in the workplace. But sometimes the occupational health report will come back, and then we see them in treatment for physio, the intervention side, and like, okay, the report went off. Like, have you met your manager? Like, what the report went? And they're like, nothing. And it can go on for weeks. So this person, you made some really nice, sensible, reasonable, could have been at least discussed with the employee, even if they couldn't implement them all, or they could at least have had that conversation. And it's really hard from our perspective. Then if that conversation hasn't taken place, it gets incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I think the point on that though is, I think the way I've generally tried to encourage leaders, managers to look at it is, when you engage with HR, when you engage with occupational health, they are there to help you manage the situation. Whereas I think what sometimes happens is it's like a hot potato. So they go, oh, right, I'm going to pass it on to you, and it's not my problem anymore. They'll tell me, and that's when I'm going to come back to you. Whereas actually, no, it's not. The whole point is to kind of say, what, Claire as a clinician, or any of the other clinicians, how can I help this person? What do I need to do? What's the best situation for me to progress with this moving forwards? Or how can I support them as best I can? What adjustments do I need to make? But it's me managing that situation. But unfortunately, as you say, whilst there are some fantastic and amazing line managers out there and leaders out there, there's also these people that sometimes are potentially over promoted, who haven't even, but then they've over promoted, or they've not got the skills, knowledge and capabilities of leading a team. They just get parachuted into a position where they're suddenly responsible for other people, and they don't ever receive training or guidance on how to best manage that situation. So actually, I think there's a bigger piece around leadership training and the empathetic leader to understand what it is that being a leader of people actually means.
If you could just put it on your 2021 plan, Danny. And going to put here, a VR provider can provide support to manager early in the course of a problem, and doing so in situ without the need for a slow and cumbersome referral process. Yeah. So Joy works in vocational rehab. So yeah, thanks, Joy. Thank you for listening as well. We've been ranting away for ages. Yeah,
sorry about that. I do go on rants every now and again.
I've just got one more question. I like to put people on the spot on my live. Sorry. You mentioned earlier about HR, occupational health, health and safety, and working together. I've worked things now, sort of in-house NHS, Occ Health, and independently private sector. What are your thoughts about how well these three professionals do interact? Do you feel that has changed over the years? Because my experience has been they tend to be quite separated in a lot of organisations. Sorry, I know it's a bit of a question. Some places don't have access to all of them, which then, if you're just doing an ad hoc health referral, it can become more tricky. But sometimes it can, it works beautifully when everyone talks to each other and, we're all on board together. It works amazing. But I just have seen it more often than not. There seems to be a communication breakdown between the three areas.
Absolutely. I'm smiling, laughing, because it's the exception rather than the rule that those three professions generally interact well. What often happens is that, and I mean no disrespect to the audience, but HR people typically will speak to HR people to get their perspective on things. Occupational health generally in the main talk to other clinicians, and health and safety go off to the Irish groups and talk to health and safety people. Very rarely will those three interact well, if I'm honest. How can we break that down? Is just by speaking to different people and not necessarily just associating with who we are. It is interesting actually that even within companies that doesn't often happen. Often, if there are in-house teams, it would be the Occ Health team speaking with HR, because HR are the people that we're talking about managed absence and things like that, whereas health and safety just see it, or can see it potentially, as transactional. Come in, do the hearing test, leave. What do I need to do? Great. HR kind of do look at it a bit more proactive and seek the advice and guidance. And again, not speaking for everybody at that point, but actually getting those three professions and also the managers in the room to have an open conversation about how best can you deal with a person or a department will probably be the best step forwards, to be fair, because the person that's then going to be applying it daily will be familiar with what's required as well, as opposed to being told what to do by a HR manager or a health and safety manager, which they don't generally do what they're told to do in the best of times.
Thank you, Danny. That's amazing. And you've got a networking event, haven't you, on Friday?
I do, yeah.
Has it got a jazzy name?
It's the lunchtime hangout.
So that's it, the lunchtime hangout. And you've got HR and health and safety, Occ Health, haven't you, coming along on Friday?
So the idea is very much to try and break down those barriers, to be fair. So we did it a couple of years ago with a networking event where we had HR and occupational health and health and safety. And what we tried to promote was speak to each other. If you're all interested and passionate about workplaces, health, employees, etc., don't just speak to people that do the same job as you. Speak to people that work in these other departments, work in these other sectors. But also, let's open the door so you don't just speak to your HR department, but you can speak to a HR manager in somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or in another company to find out what they're doing, because it's just about sharing best practice. Because I think the big thing, and one of my big passions about occupational health is we're so fortunate that what we actually do for a living helps people's health, or we help people be healthy or live healthy lives, which is such a passion, such a massively positive vocation. So surely you want to do as much as you can with the resources you have available to make a difference.
Yeah, I love that.
So
You
why
come
not?
up the mountain walking, you will talk to each other.
Exactly. Well, that was why we did mountains, because there's no technology, so you will speak to each other. And the connections people made on the last one was just fantastic. So we're doing them again, as I say, April, June, and August this year, purely just to get people outdoors talking to each other and seeing the benefits, but also making those connections.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, cool. And will you, Danny, after this call live, will you come back onto the thread and just maybe put your links in, so links to the Simply People app, and also
Of course.
if there's space at the networking, if you want any more.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to do that.
But I want to say thank you so much for your time. If anyone watches this on the replay and has any thoughts or comments about what we've ranted about, feel free to pop them in the comments, and we'll come back in later, won't we, Danny? We'll have a look.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Danny.
No worries. Thanks, Claire. Thanks for having me on. Thanks, everybody.